Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to note that as far as the president's arguments about the election and how they turned out, inciting violence, I'd like to point out here that the only violence that I'm aware of has occurred in connection with Antifa, Antifa's response to pro-Trump peaceful rally attenders. So I don't quite understand that. Maybe we'll have a chance to dwell on that more in a minute. But first, I want to talk a little bit about federal law, existing federal law, and what it requires. Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission Act prohibits businesses from engaging in unfair or deceptive trade practices. Compliance with this particular law requires that there be some consistency between what a company represents as their practices and their products and what they actually are. In other words, you can't sell one thing and provide another under the guise of providing something different than what's being sold. Both Twitter and Facebook represent and have represented for years to their users, their customers, that they take a neutral approach to election content moderation. However, as we've heard today, and as we will continue to hear today and into the foreseeable future, there are instances in which your platforms are taking a very distinctively partisan approach and not a neutral one to election-related content moderation. For example, just days before the election, Twitter suspended the account of Mark Morgan. Now, Mark Morgan is the commissioner of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Office. And they suspended Commissioner Morgan's Twitter account, specifically for a tweet celebrating the success of the U.S. southern border wall. Apparently, Commissioner Morgan's tweet, his comments about the border wall, violated Twitter platform rules governing what it calls hateful conduct. Now, I've read the offending post, and the offending post from Commissioner Mark Morgan reads as follows. At CBP and the Army Corps of Engineers, continue to build new wall every day. Every mile helps us stop gang members, murderers, sexual predators, and drugs from entering our country. It's a fact. Walls work. Period. Close quote. Mr. Dorsey, can you tell me in one sentence what exactly is hateful about Commissioner Morgan's tweet that I just read?
Well, we evaluated this tweet again, and we found that we were wrong. That was a mistake, and it was due to the fact that we had heightened awareness around government accounts during this time. So that was a mistake. We reverted it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We're going to get back to more of that in a minute and get back to the fact that, I understand that mistakes happen. But what we're going to see today is that mistakes happen a whole lot more, almost entirely on one side of the political aisle rather than the other. Now, Commissioner Morgan's statement in that tweet, as was initially taken down, is factual. There's nothing remotely hateful about it, and yet it was taken down. Now, on October 15th, Facebook relied on a third-party fact-checker's assessment to ban 2 advertisements from Facebook for, quote, partly false information. Now, both of these advertisements were factual in nature, and they revealed Joe Biden's and Kamala Harris's views on late-term abortion. Joe Biden has stated that he won't accept any restrictions on abortion, and Senator Harris's views are such that she voted against requiring care for a child born alive during a botched abortion. The very next day, the third-party fact-checker issued a statement retracting the assessment and retracting it as erroneous. However, it stunningly took Facebook almost 2 more weeks until October 29th, when voting had already started in many jurisdictions, to lift the ban on these legitimate ads. Ads that the fact-checker had already declared a couple weeks earlier were erroneously taken down. So, Mr. Zuckerberg, why on earth did it take Facebook 2 weeks to correct this error?
Senator, I'm not familiar with the details of us re-enabling that ad, so I can follow up with you after. It's possible that this was just a mistake or delay, and unfortunately, when we handle millions or billions of pieces of content a day, while we strive to do as well as possible and be as precise as possible, we will make some mistakes.
Thank you. I appreciate your acknowledgement of the fact that there are mistakes. As I've noted previously, those mistakes sure happen a whole lot more on one side of the political spectrum than the other. Now, this is understandable. We're humans, but it's also understandable why this might occur. Maybe some of it has to do with your employees. 92.83% of Facebook employees who donated to federal candidates gave to Democrats. At Twitter, it's even more stark than that, as if it could get much more stark, but 99.3% of Twitter employees who donated to federal candidates gave to Democrats. And so these mistakes, they may be mistakes, but they're mistakes that rhyme. They may not repeat themselves, but they rhyme. And the consistent theme happens to be Republicans, conservatives, and pro-life activists. Now, I'd like to ask both of you, is there a list of every user or every content creator who has been deplatformed or had their content's reach altered or have had some other adverse action taken by either Facebook or Twitter altered? Is there some list that identifies each user for which that has happened? Mr. Zuckerberg, let's hear from you. Just a yes or no question. Does such a list exist?
Senator, I'm not aware of anything like that existing.
Mr. Dorsey, how about you?
Not exactly sure what you're asking, but
Yeah.
we certainly...
Simple question. Do you have a list of people, your users or content creators, who have had some adverse action taken against them, either being deplatformed or having their reach altered or something because of the content of their posts?
Well, certainly whenever we take an action, it's recorded somewhere in a database, but I'm not sure if that's your intent.
No, that's helpful. So what I'm hearing from both of you is that while there may not be an actual list, and I'd like you both to check to see if such a list exists, but even if there isn't, there is a de facto list because you have within your databases records of occasions when this has occurred. And so I'd like to ask both of you, if such a list exists, please send it to me. I'd like to see it. If such a list does not exist, you certainly do have the data necessary in order to generate some, and I request as a member of this committee that you generate such a list and provide it to me. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Senator Graham, the chairman of the committee, has stepped out momentarily. I've been directed to recess the hearing momentarily so that we can go and vote, and then we will pick up back here in just a few minutes. I would like to, as long as I have the gavel momentarily, I'm going to ask one more question before I leave to go vote, and then we'll recess the hearing after this question.
Could I ask when we're coming back? I've been waiting to ask questions for an hour now.
Yeah, we'll be coming back as soon as Senator Graham returns. He left to vote in just a moment ago. He'll be back. Mr. Zuckerberg, in September, Facebook tagged an ad run by the American Principles Project in Michigan that criticized Joe Biden and criticized Senator Gary Peters. And the ad was tagged because it was, quote unquote, missing context. Now, the next day, the ad was shut down entirely by Facebook. Facebook relied on a supposed fact check from PolitiFact, which is a nice way for you to avoid taking accountability for the problem, except that the fact check in question literally said that the ad, quote, makes, quote, predictions we can't fact check. Apparently, this had to do with lacking context. So when did lacking context become a new standard for political ads? I mean, all political ads, all ads in general, but certainly all political ads lack context. Ben Sass just finished a resounding victory in Nebraska and I haven't seen his TV ads, but I'm sure they're brilliant. This guy's made for television. He's with or without the beard. And I'm sure his ads didn't say, Ben Sasse, great senator, but not that great of a hockey player. Or there's always context that is lacked out, that is lacking, left out in any advertisement. So what does that mean? And have you applied the missing context label to any Democratic ads, a single one that you can identify?
Senator, I'm not familiar with that specific standard, but as kind of a background on the fact-checking program, the basis of this is that we have heard resoundingly from our community that people do not want to see misinformation and believe that it is a problem. But people also believe that they do not want Facebook to be the arbiter of truth in deciding everything that is true and false. And for what it's worth, I strongly agree with that. And I do not think it is the right thing for us to assume that role. So within those bounds, we've tried to create a fact-checking program that works with independent third parties who have been accredited by the Poynter Institute for Journalism, which I think is widely respected. And we give those fact-checkers the latitude to determine whether ads or other content on our service is accurate, and if not, we apply some demotions or we prevent them from being run as ads. I can follow up in more detail afterwards on the specifics of your questions, since I'm not as familiar with them right now.
I would appreciate that very much if you'd be willing to do that, because it's not only inconsistent with logic and with what the standards that apply in every other advertising context that I'm familiar with. It's also inconsistent with what Facebook itself does. Just to give you some context for that, while we're talking about missing context, I recently posted something about the election on Facebook. And my Facebook post was almost immediately tagged with the following, quote, election officials say that voter fraud, which is historically rare, has not affected the outcome in this election. They have confirmed that mail-in voting was conducted in accordance with state voting rules, close quote. Now, I find this a little disturbing. Tag, to me, sounds a whole lot more like state-run media announcing the party line rather than a neutral company, as it purports to be, running an open online forum. This kind of editorializing insulates people from the truth, and it insinuates that anyone concerned about voter fraud must be crazy. It also states it as if it were an irrefutable, neutral, objective fact. Now, maybe these kinds of concerns are out of the mainstream in Palo Alto, but they're not out of the mainstream with the rest of America. And I have to reiterate, I hope this kind of manipulation wasn't intentional, but it's getting harder and harder for me to accept the premise that it could be anything but intentional. And if it was intentional, it's yet more evidence that Facebook's actions surrounding this election are incongruent with the promises that you've made to your own users. And that's a problem. Consistent with the directions I've been given by Chairman Graham, we're now going to recess. I predict we'll be in recess for no more than 10 or 15 minutes until Chairman Graham returns. We stand in recess.
All right, as you can hear there's going to be a short recess. For some of you, we are